Hey guys, how is everybody doing? With the release of Exorcist Believer now out in theaters this past weekend, here's my official of all six Exorcist movies as of right now. If Blumhouse does in fact release this trilogy of Exorcist films that they have planned, but as of right now of 2023, this is my ranking of all six Exorcist films. Get this out of the way. This is not the correct list. This is not a definitive list. This is my own personal opinion. These are my thoughts on these movies. This is the way I see if I were ever to rewatch them. So instead of sending death threats to me or my mother because you didn't see the movies that you wanted in the correct spot, how about you just leave me your ranking in the comments below instead of just sending death threats to me? With that all out of the way, here is my own personal ranking of all six Exorcist films as of 2023. In at number six, which is easily the worst Exorcist film in my mind, which is not even a question, and that is Exorcist 2, The Heretic. The only positive thing I guess I could say towards this movie is Reagan returning from the first movie. Other than that, this movie is fucking dog shit. It's a horrible made film to where I want to meet the person who actually wrote this movie. Who said, you know what, that 1973 absolute classic horror film that basically changed horror films as we see it today. You know what? I'm going to write this down on paper as a sequel to The Exorcist. This is my idea as a sequel. And whoever the fuck at Warner Brothers gave this movie money actually let it be filmed, actually saw the final product and thought it was good enough to release worldwide, to be shamed because this movie is horseshit. And add on the fact, apparently the sequel idea is have Reagan sit in a chair, have a fucking little hypnotized thing going bleep, 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 bleep for 5 fucking hours of this movie, which I remember when I was watching this movie. I actually had to go up and get and go to the bathroom as a normal person would do. I go to get in the bathroom. I paused the movie so I don't miss anything important. And it felt like I was sitting there for 2 hours. I was like, okay, it's got to be halfway done. I had a fucking hour left of the fucking movie. That is how boring this movie is. And oh yeah, another great idea for a sequel to The Exorcist. We're gonna have fucking grasshoppers because grasshoppers are cool. To where there's a scene where I said this in my review, to where you're in a POV shot as a grasshopper just flying around the Native American culture for no reason. Yeah, this movie is basically. I look. I will say this. There are worser horror movies out there. There are worser sequels out there. Excuse me. But I cannot think of a worser idea for a sequel, though. If you were to ask me what's the worst idea for a sequel, this is what I would tell you. It is that bad. And at number five is Dominion, a prequel to The Exorcist. Now, there's a story behind these movies to where apparently this movie was made first before Exorcist at the beginning, and then something happened to where somebody didn't like what they saw, so they wanted to change a few things. Rennie Harlan, who's best known for Die Hard 2 nowadays, was brought in to do some reshoots, and they gave him an extra few weeks to shoot a brand new movie. Released the Exorcist at the beginning. That movie didn't do so well, so they let this movie come out, and they're basically just the same movie. So no matter where I place these movies, it's basically the same thing. But I would rather rewatch the one above it than I would rather rewatch this movie because this movie it just doesn't feel like an Exorcist movie. If it didn't have the title prequel to The Exorcist, and if no one told me that this was an exorcism film, I probably wouldn't know that this is an Exorcist film because it doesn't feel like it. It does not feel like The Exorcist. It feels like a generic, like, adventure film someone just had collecting dust, picked it up after The Exorcist Beginnings flop, added a few scenes here and there to make it feel like an Exorcist movie, slapped a recognizable title on there just to make it an Exorcist film. If you didn't tell me, it's basically a boring drama about Christianity. That is all this movie is, basically. But it does have a few good ideas, but that third act, which I praise about the beginning, and which is one of my favorite things about that movie, excuse me, which I'll get to, Third act of this movie, I don't even understand what it is. It's the demon of this movie. You don't even get Pazuzu. Like you don't even get to see Pazuzu. He's not a thing in this movie. The Pazuzu that we get this movie is some random weird fucking dude that's bald and wearing a diaper. What? And at number four, just right above that, is Exorcist: The Beginning. Basically, all I said about Dominion doesn't really change here, but I do like that this were prequels in my mind. I don't like them. They're giving me answers I never asked for. They're giving me details that I never cared for. But The Exorcist: The Beginning, to me, The Exorcist could work for a prequel. That is a movie franchise to where I do think that The Exorcist could have earned a prequel, but they just didn't do a very good job. I love the third act of this movie. It actually felt like an Exorcist film. But I will say this movie has a huge pacing issue. Boring shit happens, people talking, more boring shit happens. Oh, this kid just got torn up by a pack of hyenas. Boring shit, more talking, boring shit, more talking. Something cool apparently just happened to where I feel nobody knew what to do until the third act. And this movie's 2 hours long. To where this movie could have been like a 30-minute episode on the Exorcist TV series. That is how boring this movie is. There's an Exorcist TV series that like nobody knows. I didn't like it. Coming in at number three. Now here on out, I can watch this one, and then the other two are basically movies that I love. But coming in at number three is the new kid on the block, Exorcist Believer. Um, this movie is fine. It is a fine Exorcist film. To where I was one of those people that basically said that this is probably not the best idea. To me, The Exorcist should have never became a franchise. It should have never gotten sequels, should have not gotten as many films as we do today. But when I heard that this movie was being announced, I basically groaned. The fact that it was going to do the legacy sequel shit that I'm basically tired of at this point, which, thanks Halloween 2018, I love that movie, but you basically created a whole new fucking praise that I basically hate at this point. When I heard that they were going to do a legacy sequel, I did not think that was a good idea. The fact that David Gordon Green and Danny McBride, who made the new Halloween trilogy, came in to do this movie, I kind of lost hope there. And the first trailer, it did not get my attention. For the weird cutaway, I had to fix my fucking light because it's an asshole. Well, like I said, the first trailer, it didn't get my attention. If you didn't play that Exorcist score, I probably would have known that this was a sequel to The Exorcist, and then they released that second trailer. I was like, it's a generic exorcism film. But then when it got to that halfway point, I was like, you know what? That looks pretty good. And what I saw of the film more and more as the film slowly started to come out, I was like, you know what? Maybe this movie won't be as bad as everybody else. Maybe this movie won't be as bad as I think it will be. And then first reactions came out, and they were not very good. And I went in with low expectations, thinking that this movie was not going to be good. That this was a movie that was going to be a horribly made film. That this was not going to be a good film. But when I walked out of the theater, I did not think it was bad as everybody went out and said it was. I thought this movie was fine. I think The Exorcist Believer is fine. It is a fine Exorcist film to where I honestly would say if you cut out the legacy stuff, if you cut out the Chris character in general, this could have just been a good sequel to The Exorcist. The first two acts of this movie, I was really invested in. I really enjoyed it. I was like, you know what? Maybe this movie won't be as bad as I've been saying. And then it got to the third act of the film where it introduces Chris, who is one of the main characters of the first movie, who actually came out of retirement to be in this movie. When it got to that point, I was like, what are we doing here? And spoilers, if you have not seen the movie, don't yell at me that I'm spoiling the movie for you. Just go watch the movie for yourself. Stop yelling at me and shit. Stop yelling at movie reviewers in general for spoiling a movie for you. If you want to watch the fucking movie, go up to the theater and watch it. Don't yell at us for spoiling movie for you when you shouldn't be fucking watching this. To where they waste Chris in this movie. They completely waste her. the first scene that we get with her, she is talking to the main character of this movie, and then she goes and meets the possessed girls to see what she's gonna deal with, and then she goes to Catherine, who honestly I feel she could have been cut out of the movie as well, and then she gets her eye stabbed out, and then she's in the hospital for the rest of the fucking movie. What was the point of bringing her back if you were just gonna do that to her? Oh yeah, no, apparently. Oh yeah. To no one's surprise, we got a Reagan cameo. Well, no fucking dirt. Look, I enjoyed this movie. It is better than some of the other movies below it. But if we're supposed to be getting two more of these movies, this is what I have to say. Blumhouse, David Gordon Green, you know they're gonna make this movie no matter what. Pump the brakes. Take your time writing your script. Possibly replace David Gordon Green. I'm not saying he's a bad director, but I don't think he's fit for this directing, for this franchise. Take him out, get a different director who loves his franchise and who's a good director. Take your time, because that the whole backlash that you got on Halloween, imagine the backlash you're gonna get on this movie. Take your time and don't rush things and make Deceiver a better sequel than this movie was. Number two. Oh boy, get your pitchforks and torches ready because you're not gonna like my number two. My number two is the original Exorcist. The original classic, the one that started it all, probably the most iconic horror film of all time, right behind Halloween. I think that this is a good Exorcist film. This is a good installment of the franchise. For this being the first of the franchise, it's good. Understand what this movie did for the time that it came out. I understand that. I understand why this movie probably scared the piss out of you when you first watched it. Scared the living shit out of you when you watched this back in the 70s. I understand that, but the Exorcist craze has never been for me. It's never been a franchise that I've loved. It's never been a genre of horror that I've loved. But I will say this, the original Exorcist is great. I love the performance by Linda Blair in this movie playing Regan. She is absolutely fantastic. I love a lot of things in this movie. I will say there is a lot of creepy stuff in this movie, especially the whole scene where you get that quick flash of Pazuzu in the hospital. I love that stuff, and the creepy dialogue that Reagan says, saying all these weird sexual things and this language for like a 12-year-old shouldn't be really saying for the 70s, and probably shocked a lot of audiences and stabbing her area with a cross. This movie is creepy. I understand why this movie got all the love that it deserves. I understand why this is one of your favorite movies of all time, let alone one of your favorite horror movies of all time. Possibly your favorite horror movie of all time. I get that. But The Exorcist just isn't for me. I do like it. It's a good film. But, again, Exorcism has never been for me. And at number one, may actually surprise some of you, is The Exorcist 3, or Legion, whatever the hell this movie is called. I watched the director's cut, and it's called Legion in that cut. I think The Exorcist 3 is awesome. This is a awesome film to where I basically have little to no negatives of this film. The only negative that I have with this movie is basically a nitpick, and that's like this whole dream sequence of this movie. If you cut that sequence out of the movie, it would have no difference to the film, it'd have no difference to the story at all. But other than that, this is a brilliant horror film, down to Brad Dourif's performance, the hospital setting, the awesome jump scare with the shears or whatever they're called, to down to the detective story of this film, to where it keeps you guessing, it keeps you invested to where is this gonna go? What really carries this film, and what is easily the best part about this movie, and the main reason I would rewatch this movie over and over and over, is because of Brad Dourif's performance. Brad Dourif might give his best performance in this movie, which is saying a lot because he's in a lot of great movies and he's given great performances, mainly Chucky. But Brad Dourif is the best part about this movie, and there's no denying that. And I love the hospital setting. I've said that about a lot of hospital horror movies with Nightmare on Elm Street 3 Dream Warriors, Halloween 2, and whatever else is out there at this point. But when you have this movie to where it actually does good with it, to where down to cinematography, acting, directing, writing, this movie is fantastic and this is that one Exorcist movie to where every time if I'm ever gonna do a binge watch of this franchise, this is the one I would put on first probably. That is my ranking of all six Exorcist films. Thank you all so much for watching. Please leave me your ranking in the comments below instead of sending me death threats because I didn't put the order or you didn't see which one you wanted to see at number one or which one you want to see at the bottom. Don't do that. Don't be that person. Thank you all so much for watching. If you liked my ranking, like this video. If you loved it, subscribe and bell notifications so you will get notified for my latest videos. And please look out for my Pet Cemetery remake review and my Pet Cemetery ranking. So look out for those videos, and until my next video, I'll see you all next time.